How's it going, apes? Welcome to another lecture. Today we're going to look at the modern large-scale farming methods, and what we're going to look at here is mainly what's involved in regards to monocropping, the care of the land in regards to fertilizers and pesticides, as well as their effects on the land in a positive way in regards to feeding the world, and negatively in regards to human health and the environment. So agriculture has been around for over 10,000 years, and that allowed humans to move from a subsistence lifestyle where we could store food. And as a result, more food comes more people, and more people require more food, and so on. So it's a constant cycle. And through the Industrial Revolution and Mechanisation and burning of fossil fuels, we developed this business called agribusiness, or just this industrial agriculture where you can produce, you can process, you can distribute, and send it to in this case, a supermarket or a store, all because of the advantages of fossil fuels. So what we will look at first is what we call an energy subsidy. And what we're looking at with this is the fossil fuel energy and the human energy that was input per calorie of food produced. So how much energy was used to produce 1 calorie of food? And this involves production of fertilizers and pesticides as well. So for example, if you look at that hamburger, just a quarter-pound hamburger, if you look at all the resources, starting at the bottom, you have all the fossil fuel. And again, that involves transportation, the land required to grazing and grow feed for the crops don't eat the feed. Grow the feed for the cows, and then the land needed for the cows to graze, how much water is involved, and even the foraging of grain as well if they're not grazing animals. So quite a deal. So and when we talk about energy subsidies, take for example, if it takes about 44 pounds of grain to feed to cattle to produce. So what we get as a result is you get basically 2.2 pounds of beef. The energy subsidy is 20, and we'll talk more about that later. So again, that transportation from farm to plate, all that is involved. And it is estimated that of all the energy used in the United States, 17% of it goes to the production of food, and that, again, that includes transportation and fertilizers. So when we look at energy subsidies, just think about it. If you have a small farm, it requires a small amount of energy. And this is a great quote from Michael Pollan. You might have read this book. It's The Omnivore's Dilemma. If not, you should check it out. But anyways, for about every calorie you eat, 10 calories were used in some way, shape, or form, either transportation, either applying pesticides, harvesting, and so on. And you can see the figure on the right. So the energy input per calorie of food is obtained is greater for modern agriculture practices than for traditional. So those energy inputs, if you look at the bottom for hunting and gathering and for small-scale food production, are mostly in the form of human energy, whereas as you get farther up the top of that chart, fuel energy is the primary energy subsidy for those large-scale modern food productions. So just gives you an idea of the energy put in compared to the energy you're getting out when you eat your food. And this leads us to this green revolution. So part of the green revolution was this shift in farming methods, and involved these new management of techniques in regards to that's a tough word for me, mechanization, fertilization, irrigation, and even improved crop varieties, which we'll look at later in this chapter, which includes GMOs as well. So we're going to talk about all these right now, but first let's talk about Norman Borlaug. He Nobel Peace Prize winner, and you can see it started mainly in the 1940s, where what he developed was strains of wheat that were more resistant, produced higher yields, and what we saw is a major shift in farming, especially in developing countries like the Philippines and Mexico. So it was a huge boom, and again, those developing countries, we have more food, which means now we have more people. So let's start off with mechanization. So think about it. You have a field that has to be plowed, things have to be planted, irrigated, weeded, protected from pests, harvested, and then tilled for the next season. And then even after harvesting, crops have to be dried, sorted, cleaned, prepared, and it can be very economically advantageous to replace humans or animals, you can kind of see it at the top of the picture there, with machinery, especially when you have access to fossil fuels and if fossil fuel prices are low. And if you think about it now, and if you look at the labor, and this is an example in the US, actual human labor is less than 5% in the United States or in other developed countries because we have machines. Whereas if you look at developing countries, a lot of human labor is going into the cultivation of crops. So mechanization is huge in regards to output and amount of food. Now looking at the economies of scale, and it's just a matter of size. So think, if you are producing a lot of crops, your production, the cost of your production is going to go down. So it's advantageous to have a much larger farm and grow maybe a single or a couple crops, which we'll talk about later in this lecture, and it's more to make more money. So a perfect example of looking at the graph is if you saw that in 50 years in Iowa, the family farm in Iowa doubled the size of it. So there were less farms per se, but the farms were much larger. So again, you had those small farms kind of going out of business or combining with other farms just because, again, higher output means more money. Another thing that's huge in regards to crop production is irrigation, which we've talked about a little before a couple chapters ago in regards to water, but we all know you need water to grow crops. And with irrigation, we've been able to even grow crops where you wouldn't expect to have much plant life. And Imperial Valley, California is a perfect example. Here you have an area that is 1 million acres of desert, but because of groundwater and irrigation, this area of the world produces 40% of the world's food. So quite amazing. What we're kind of on the California, Arizona border there, to give you an idea where you're at. There are some negative consequences of irrigation, though. We all know it takes a lot of water. So again, Imperial Valley, that thing is just sucking up water for those crops. But you also get things like saltwater intrusion, which we'll see here in a second. But waterlogging, what's going on here in the picture is it damages the roots of the crops and they don't have access to oxygen. So the root growth is impaired. And then that saltwater intrusion, like we saw with groundwater depletion, you can also get salinization, which is a result of, you can see in this picture, you have crops, a field being irrigated. There's tiny micro salts in the water. The crops are irrigated, but over time, those little tiny salts build up. And as a result, the soil is unable to produce and actually has toxic levels that will stop the plant growth. Looking at fertilizers. Fertilizers are incredibly important in industrial agriculture because it keeps soil in constant production. It requires large amounts of fertilizers to replace this organic matter and nutrients when the farmer is tilling the soil. So there's two types we're going to look at. So again, it is necessary because we said that it's in constant production. Every year it's being harvested, tilled, and then the next spring you're adding the same crops. And the main ingredients of fertilizers are the NPK. You may have seen this before. So we're looking at nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And we'll talk about these numbers here later on, but they can be specific depending on what type of crop you are growing. So the two types of fertilizers we have are, the first are organic. This is mainly matter from plants and animals, and most of the time it's decomposed animal manure. And what this does, it returns nutrients removed from harvesting. And we'll see here is what it's doing, it's returning nutrients to the soil. There aren't specific nutrients, the ones that the plants need, it just is creating a healthy soil, which we'll see the opposite with synthetic fertilizers. And what's going on with these is we're using tremendous amounts of fossil fuels just to create them. There's highly concentrated, but what this results is high crop yields. I mean, you have this efficient way of giving nutrients to the plant. The plant uses these nutrients, giving you more food. And again, the advantages, you can easily apply it. And like we looked at the KNP, you can give whatever, certain plants need a certain amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. In this case, you can make it so whatever the plant needs, you can get it to it, and it is also easily absorbed and usually water soluble. But again, there are some disadvantages, and I think this diagram does a great job. So our synthetic fertilizers, just think they feed the plant. They're more worried about the plant, whereas those organic fertilizers, they're feeding the soil. It's a very healthy soil. Remember, when you have a healthy soil, you have healthy plants as well. So as we mentioned, they do use lots of energy. Eutrophication is a result we've talked about a couple chapters now, and unfortunately they do not add any organic matter to the soil. So remember that organic matter allows for cation exchange. Remember the potassium that'll be exchanged between the roots and the soil, and then even the water retention. You need that organic matter to soak up the water. In times of drought, the plants can use it, and so on. Moving on to monocropping. So mono, and you can see in the picture, it's pretty self-explanatory. Mono means one, and it's just large plantings of a single species. And it's very dominant in the United States. It improves productivity, which is a good thing. You can harvest and plant at the same time every year. And again, you can cater to what you're growing. You know, if there's a certain pesticide or certain nutritional needs, in this case, the corn needs, you can cater to that and you're good to go. As always, there are some cons. We can lead to environmental degradation, loss of biodiversity. Again, when you have one species, you lose biodiversity. Soil erosion can become a problem because fields that are monocropped are ready for planting and harvesting all at once. So soil will be exposed for a long period of time. And then even vulnerability to pests. So you can have large expanses of this single plant, and that represents a food supply for a certain pest. And it's like you go into the casino at the all-you-can-eat buffet, and it's your favorite food, nonstop and unlimited in regards to the pests. So talking about pests, let's move on. There's a few different types of pesticides, and these can be either natural or synthetic. And what they do is they kill or control organisms that people consider pests. And U.S. is responsible for 1/3 of the worldwide use of these pesticides. It's about 500 million pounds are applied to food crops, cotton, and fruit trees a year, which is huge. And again, but these allow greater crop yields and without using as much land, which is a benefit. Broad spectrum. So if it's a broad spectrum, that means we're hitting about everything. It's not specific. We can kill many types of different pests, whereas the opposite is selective, where you're looking for one thing, one pest. You're going to narrow it down, and that's what those pesticides are going to kill. But then we have the persistent pesticides. And if something's persistent, remember, it doesn't go away. And what's going to happen is these are going to remain in the environment for an extremely long time. And we saw this with DDT. I mean, look at this is an ad, and you can spray your surface and 3 months killing when sprayed on. That's insane. So it'll sit there, and they were using this, I believe, to kill flies. Quick killing, kill coat, just kind of scary stuff. And we talked about how it will be biomagnified in the food web, and how by the time, this eagle is eating this fish, the concentration of DDT is 10 million times than it was when it washed into the water. And we all know as a result, the eggs of the eagles would become soft, the chicks wouldn't be able to be born, and the populations were going down. So fortunately, DDT is no longer in use in the United States. Non-persistent pesticides, so these don't hang around, which is a good thing, but you do have to apply them more often because they're not going to be sticking around killing the pests. So what we will get, though, is this pesticide resistance, and going back to your biology class with alleles and being passed down to the offspring. When you apply a pesticide, you're going to kill a majority of the pests. But again, remember, there's going to be survivors, and those survivors, this is the wrong slide, or wrong information. These survivors are going to, no worries. These survivors are going to pass down their information to their offspring. These offspring are going to be resistant to the pesticide, so when they apply it again, they don't die, or as time goes on, you're going to have to apply more and more. And what we get is what they call the pesticide treadmill, and this is a positive feedback. And again, what I said, you apply the pesticides, some are resistant, they apply some more, and it's just constant, this positive feedback where they're adding more pesticides to the field just because of those resistant alleles. And there are, again, environmental effects. What we'll have is they will kill organisms that benefit, especially those non-specific or broad-spectrum pesticides. So even things like bees, butterflies, things that you need to pollinate, plants that fix nitrogen will be killed off as well, and even that runoff. So you can see the runoff from these fields in Hawaii ending up in the ocean. Not only does it pollute groundwater, but if you're in a coastal area like here in Hawaii, it harms the ocean as well. And we're going to look at end it with insecticides as well. So just what it sounds like, these things target insects or invertebrates. That is it for large scale farming method. As always, check the website. And if you need anything, just let me know. See ya.